Lecture 15. The theme is English as a World Language, and the plan of the lecture is English as a World Language. English in Canada, Australia, and in some countries in Africa. In the course of the 15th century, the London literary language gradually spread all over the country, superseding local dialects. Spoken English in various parts of Britain gradually approaches the literary norm, and the differences between the norm and the popular speech tend to become obliterated. This process has been carefully studied by the eminent British scholar Henry Wilde. According to his classification, written documents of the 15th century can be classified into three types. So they are those written in the London literary language, those written in a more or less pure local dialects, and basically in London literary language. This classification cuts right across another classification, that according to the kind of documents. There are official documents, literary texts, and private letters. London documents of the former half of the 15th century are poems by Thomas Hoccleve, so official London papers and also official documents from other towns. The literary language is also found in letters written by kings, queens, ministers, and other officials. In the course of the last few centuries, the English language spread over various parts of the globe. In the 18th century, the English penetrated into India and it came under English power. In this huge territory, which since 1947 is divided between two states, India and Pakistan, English has not, however, ousted the local language. Its sphere is limited to large cities and to a certain social layer. In India today, the English language is a state language alongside the native languages Hindi and Urdu. In the course of the 7 Years' War, the English conquered Canada, which had been a French colony. A few decades later, English settlers appeared in Australia. During the 19th century, the whole of Australia and also New Zealand and many islands in the Oceania were colonized. In the early years of the 20th century, the English penetrated into South Africa and made themselves masters of the Cape Colony and of the Transvaal. In all of these territories, the English language had to compete with other colonizers' languages and with those of the local populations. In some cases, a compromise was the result. Thus, in Canada, English did not entirely supersede French. The French-Canadian dialect, which shows a strong influence of English, is still used in several regions of Canada. In the Republic of South Africa, the Dutch dialect, called Afrikaans, has survived and enjoys equal rights with English. A world language is one that is spoken internationally and learned and spoken by numerous people as a second language. A world language is characterized not only by the total number of speakers, that is, native and second language speakers, but also by geographical distribution and its use in international organizations and diplomatic relations. The most widely spoken and likely the fastest spreading world language today is English. The most important question in this sphere is that about the English language in America. Since the American people became a nation in its own right, the question arose of the relations between British and American English. In the 1920s, a theory came into being which asserted that there was a separate American language, different from English. The chief exponent of this theory was the well-known American author and journalist Henry Louis Mencken. His book, The American Language, whose very title indicated the author's views, was first published in 1919 and then appeared in several more editions. The earliest English settlers in America came from London and the countries close to it, that is Suffolk, Norfolk, and Essex. These settlers occupied territories on the Atlantic coast, the territory now known as New England, the states of Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. When the struggle with England came in the late 18th century, the colonies only occupied a narrow strip on the Atlantic coast. Only gradually, in the course of many migrations, which were accompanied by an influx of ever new masses of immigrants from Europe, did the colonies cross the Alleghenies, the plains of the central continent, reach the Rocky Mountains and the Pacific coast in the mid-19th century. Proclamation of an independent United States, the ensuing war with England, which brought about complete separation of the colonies from the metropolis, was accompanied by a separatist movement in language matters as well. Centrifugal tendencies in American English were also fostered by influx of immigrants from Scotland and Ireland who brought to the New World their own dialects. The most representative variety of American English differs from the British standard in phonetics and the spelling points. Differences in morphology are negligible. The only distinct Americanism is the form gotten, second participle of the verb get, as against the British form got. A typical feature of American English is the preservation of the present subjunctive in sentences like I suggest that he go, and etc. In the future tense, the auxiliary will prevails over shall in the persons. In colloquial American speech, we often find formations like I been, I taken, I seen, and etc. These formations are the result of a phonetic weakening and the loss of the auxiliary verb have. Have, have. However, the loss of the auxiliary means a change in the second participle, which tends to become a finite verb form. In the sphere of vocabulary, the differences between British and American English are most pronounced. In some cases, American English has preserved old words which were superseded by synonyms in England, as sick, which in the predicative use has been superseded by ill in England, or guess, meaning suppose, or fall, meaning autumn. In other cases, new words appeared in America to denote new notions, as caucus, preliminary meeting of a party commit, graft, which means illegal profit, and etc. So you may see a short list of different words used in Britain and in the United States. For example, British words and American words. Lift, elevator. Sweets, candy. Behind, back off. Underground, subway. Pavement, sidewalk, shop, store, postman, letter carrier. Within the English language in America, there are differences which, however, are not great enough to make us speak of dialects. So Crabb, who made a close study of these differences, states three main types, as he calls them, of American English. The first, Eastern; the second, Southern; the third, Western or general. Differences between them concern mainly points of pronunciation. The three types are in various relations to the English national language, either agreeing with it or differing from it, as the case may be. The existing divergences between British and American English are too insignificant to justify talk of a separate American language. Thus we arrive at the conclusion that English is the mother tongue both of the British and the American nation. Since there are some differences between them, the appropriate terms to use are the British variant and the American variant of the English language. The English language in Canada has several peculiarities in pronunciation and in vocabulary. The least element of the diphthongs I and ow before voiceless consonant sounds like ah or eh, as in hate, height, out. Before the sonant l, m, n, an additional vowel often arises, as in film, philem, known, noun. The consonant r is sounded in all positions. Canadian English has some words that are not used either in Britain or in the United States. Australian English also has some peculiarities in pronunciation, and in vocabulary. The diphthong a has become something like a, so that the word day is pronounced in a way close to the London pronunciation of die. The long e tends to become I or a, as in sweets, sweets. The long u tends to become u or o, as in boot, butte, boat. In the sphere of vocabulary, Australian English has some characteristic features as well. The noun stock has preserved its original meaning, cattle, and also as part of compounds. Stockholder means cattle breeder, stockhouse means cattle yard. The noun station has acquired the meaning cattle farm, and etc. A number of words have been adopted from the language of the Aborigines, besides such words as boomerang and the dingo, which have become international. There are the words wadi, cudgel, kaboo, child, melee, acacia. So, Turner, in a special study of Australian and New Zealand English, points out some peculiarities of Australian pronunciation. Thus he states that Australian listens are slower, more even and more deliberate than English ones. In the sentence "Thank you very much," educated English would stress "thank" and "much," while the slower Australian version would include a stress or secondary stress on "very." Since Australian A at least approaches I in pronunciation, a differentiating development of the latter phoneme is inevitable, and it tends towards oi. Distinction between WH and W is very often made in New Zealand, the WH being sounded as H plus W. Thus, the difference between what and what, where and where is being maintained. There are also some minor peculiarities of pronunciation. As for lexical peculiarities, Turner lists such phrases as cookies, joy, meaning trickle, blackfellow's sugar, the meaning is manna from the white gum, settler's clock, meaning kookaburra, an Australian bird, Stafford's friend, meaning dingo, a wild dog, and also the words Aussie, meaning Australian, Tassie, meaning Tasmania, and the trammy, meaning tramway worker. As New Zealandisms, Turner quotes the words coot in silly coot, meaning bloke, snitch, meaning grudge or dislike, the verb snitch, meaning betray, and the phrases get the pricker, meaning get annoyed, drag the chain, meaning be a slow worker. And there are dialects arising in the Pacific area and in Africa and based on combining local structure with English vocabulary. The chief hybrid languages are the following: Pidgin English, which existed for some time in eastern China and in Japan. The second, Beach Lama on the Pacific coast, and the Kru English in Africa. Turner, in a special study of Australian and New Zealand English, points out some peculiarities of Australian pronunciation. So, as we've said, that he states that Australian rhythms are slower, more even, and more deliberate than English ones. And the distinction between WH and W is very often made in New Zealand. In the modern English period, local dialects were gradually superseded by the literary language. However, they have not disappeared, and they still are a means of communication in the respective territories. Modern dialects are divided into 6 groups. The modern Scottish and the Northern dialects correspond to the modern English Northern, the modern Western, Central, and Eastern to the modern English Midland. The Southern dialects are a more unified group. Each group has its peculiarities in the sphere of phonetics and vocabulary. Now be ready for the questions. Try to answer. The first, what kind of languages are used in Canada? What is the difference between British English and Australian English? What borrowings are the most numerous in modern English?